During a charity gala for children in need, Robert Downey Jr. shared a brief conversation with a quiet 8-year-old girl, handing her an Iron Man figurine before heading backstage for his speech. What he didn't realize was that she had quietly followed him through the corridors, her small footsteps shadowing his own, desperate for a reason only she knew. The truth he would uncover behind those innocent eyes of this little orphan girl would not only break his heart, but change both their lives forever. Comment where you're watching from today, and if you like this story that will melt your heart, don't forget to subscribe. The sleek black limousine glided through the bustling city streets, its tinted windows reflecting the kaleidoscope of evening lights. Inside, Robert Downey reclined against the plush leather seats, his eyes closed for a moment as he savored a brief respite from the demanding week he'd just endured. The car's interior was a cocoon of luxury, occupied by his ever-present assistant Kenny, 2 stoic bodyguards, and the focused chauffeur navigating the evening traffic. "Mr. Downey," Kenny's crisp voice broke the silence, "we'll be arriving at the Celestial Bay Hotel in approximately 15 minutes. Shall we review the event schedule one last time?" Robert opened his eyes, a tired but genuine smile crossing his face. "Sure, Kenny. Hit me with it." Kenny, ever efficient, tapped his tablet and began detailing the evening's rundown. "Your speech is scheduled for 8:45 p.m., lasting about 10 minutes. Makeup and final wardrobe check will be at 8:30 in the green room. The children's choir performance follows at 9, and then you're free to mingle until the closing remarks at 10:30. Robert nodded, absorbing the information. "Thanks, Kenny. I don't know what I'd do without you, especially during weeks like this. The end-of-year months are always a whirlwind." "Just doing my job, sir," Kenny replied with a hint of pride. "I'm glad the flight arrangements and hotel bookings worked out smoothly, despite the tight schedule." As Kenny spoke, Robert's attention was drawn to a medium-sized cardboard box resting against his assistant's polished shoes. Curiosity piqued, he asked, "What's in the box, Kenny?" Kenny glanced down, a slight frown crossing his face. That. It's a bit of a mix-up, actually. The box contains dozens of Iron Man figurines from the first movie, about 6 inches tall each. The vendor mistakenly produced these instead of the current Avengers version we'd ordered as souvenirs for the orphanage children's choir. "Oh?" Robert leaned forward, intrigued. "May I?" Kenny nodded, sliding the box towards him. Robert opened it, carefully lifting one of the figurines. The detail was impressive, capturing the essence of the original suit design. Without really thinking about it, he slipped one into his jacket pocket, the weight of it oddly comforting against his chest. "We're keeping these as backup," Kenny explained. "The correct versions have already been delivered to the event organizers." As they neared the hotel, Robert could see the grand entrance through the windshield. A length of plush red carpet stretched from the curb to the massive glass doors, bordered by metal barriers, holding back hundreds of excited fans. Camera flashes were already popping as their car was spotted. Robert took a deep breath, running a hand through his carefully styled hair and adjusting his tie. The chauffeur smoothly brought the car to a stop and, with practiced precision, opened Robert's door. A wave of sound washed over him, cheering fans, clicking cameras, and the general buzz of excitement. Stepping out with his signature confidence, Robert flashed an easy smile and waved to the crowd. He made his way along the carpet, stopping occasionally for photos while steadily progressing toward the hotel's entrance. Event staff waited just inside, ready to escort him to his next destination. As he walked, Robert couldn't help but feel the weight of the Iron Man figurine in his pocket, a small reminder of where his journey had begun and how far he'd come. The moment Robert stepped through the grand entrance of the Celestial Bay Hotel, he was enveloped by an atmosphere of opulence and anticipation. The expansive, marble-floored hallway stretched before him, its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, inviting glow over the gathered groups of children. Near the sweeping staircase, he spotted Senator Mitchell deep in conversation with tech mogul Sarah Chen, while eager young fans behind him already surrounded acclaimed filmmaker David Torres. A cluster of Broadway stars, including the legendary Marcus Thompson, huddled near an ornate pillar, reviewing their presentation notes. The air buzzed with the energy that only arose when multiple luminaries gathered in one space. The young faces ranged from around 8 to 15 years old, all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. Their excited whispers echoed off the walls, creating a gentle buzz of anticipation that filled the space. Robert could feel their eyes on him, a mix of awe and excitement palpable in the air. Before he could take more than a few steps, a woman in a sleek black blazer approached him, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. "Mr. Downey," she greeted with a professional smile. "I'm Mia, the event organizer. It's a pleasure to have you here with us tonight." Robert shook her hand warmly. "The pleasure's all mine, Mia. This looks like quite the setup you've got here." Mia nodded, gesturing towards a group of younger children aged 8 to 10. "If you'll follow me, I'd like to introduce you to some very special guests." As they made their way through the gathering, Robert noticed how the children's faces lit up as he passed. He offered warm smiles and small waves, touched by their enthusiasm. When they reached the group of younger children, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes stepped forward. "Mr. Downey, I'm Diane Anderson, the senior staff leader from Bright Horizon Orphanage. We can't thank you enough for being here tonight." Robert shook her hand, genuinely moved by the warmth in her voice. "It's an honor to be here, Ms. Anderson. I've heard wonderful things about Bright Horizon." Diane's eyes sparkled with both hope and determination as she spoke. "This gala represents a crucial opportunity for us. The funds raised tonight will go towards much-needed improvements at the orphanage, and these children," she gestured to the group around her, "will be performing a special choir number later in the evening." As Robert listened to Diane, his gaze wandered over the sea of excited faces. Suddenly, his attention was caught by a child standing slightly apart from the others. Unlike her peers who fidgeted and chattered with enthusiasm, this little girl remained still, her eyes distant and thoughtful. There was a solemnity about her that seemed out of place in one so young. Despite Mia's gentle reminder about needing to prepare for his speech, and the growing crowd entering the decorated hall behind them, Robert felt compelled to approach the quiet child. Kneeling down to her level, he managed to catch her eye. In a gentle voice, he asked, "Hi there, what's your name?" The girl's response was barely above a whisper, "Joanne." Her next question, however, struck a chord within him. "Are you Iron Man?" Without hesitation, Robert reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved the Iron Man figurine he'd taken from the box earlier. The surrounding orphanage workers watched in amazed silence as he presented it to her. "I play him in the movies," Robert said with a warm smile. "But you know what? I think you might be the real superhero here tonight." Before Joanne could respond, Kenny appeared at Robert's shoulder, urgently reminding him of their schedule. With obvious reluctance, Robert rose and followed Mia toward the preparation area. As he walked away, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about that little girl. Little did he know how significant that brief encounter would become. The backstage area was a flurry of activity as Robert was ushered through the crowd towards his preparation room. Makeup artists and wardrobe assistants buzzed around him, making last-minute adjustments to ensure he looked perfect for his upcoming speech. As he navigated through the controlled chaos, Robert remained unaware that he had picked up an unexpected shadow. It wasn't until he reached the restricted celebrity area that he noticed a small figure darting between the legs of busy staff members. Joanne, the quiet girl from earlier, had broken away from her group to follow him. The Iron Man figurine remained clutched tightly in her small hands as she ran forward, wrapping her arms around Robert's legs in a tight hug. Touched by the girl's bravery and sweet gesture, Robert knelt down once again, gently brushing her hair back from her face. "Hey there, Joanne. You're quite the little adventurer, aren't you?" Joanne looked up at him with wide eyes, finally able to express her gratitude. "Thank you for Iron Man," she said softly, holding up the figurine. Robert's heart melted at her words. He hugged her and brushed her hair, but he quickly realized the predicament they were in. Joanne was now separated from her group and likely unsure of her way back. With his tight schedule looming over him, he made a split-second decision. "Do you know how to go back to your group?" Joanne looked around and suddenly realized that she was lost, unsure of the way back. She shook her head. "Why don't you keep me company for a bit?" he offered, getting up and reaching out his hand. Joanne's face brightened as she took hold of his hand. "After I deliver my speech, we can search for your group together." Robert led her into the powder room area, where busy staff barely registered her presence during his touch-up. He chatted with Joanne, asking her about her favorite superheroes and making her giggle with funny faces in the mirror. When a backstage coordinator appeared to summon him for his speech, Robert knew he couldn't take Joanne on stage with him. He turned to Kenny, who had been hovering nearby. "Kenny, I need a favor," Robert said, his tone serious. "Can you watch over Joanne until I'm done with my speech? It'll only be for a short while." Kenny looked surprised but nodded his agreement. Robert knelt down to Joanne's level once more. "Joanne, I need you to stay here with Kenny while I go give my speech, okay? He's a good person, so don't leave his side until I come back. Can you do that for me?" Joanne nodded solemnly, her grip on the Iron Man figurine tightening slightly. "That's my girl," Robert said with a smile, giving her a quick hug before standing up. As his name was announced, Robert ascended to the stage, the spotlight harsh against his eyes. Before beginning his address, he stole a quick glance toward the backstage where Joanne stood with Kenny, her presence somehow grounding him despite the blinding lights and roaring crowd. Robert cleared his throat and focused on his speech, addressing the charity gala event attendees with his characteristic charm and wit. All the while, a part of his mind remained aware of the little girl waiting in the wings and the unexpected connection they had formed. As the applause from his speech gradually faded, Robert stepped off the stage and moved toward the backstage area, the warm buzz of accomplishment mingling with an underlying urgency. Joanne. He needed to check on her to make sure she was okay, but the moment he saw Kenny, standing alone with an uncharacteristically stricken expression, Robert's chest tightened. "Kenny," Robert called, his voice sharp, the word cutting through the quiet hum of backstage activity. "Where's Joanne?" Kenny flinched, his usual composure cracking. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Downey," he stammered, his words tripping over each other. "We heard ambulance sirens outside and she just ran. It happened so fast. I couldn't stop her." Robert froze, the weight of Kenny's words crashing over him like a wave. "She ran." His voice, though low, carried a dangerous edge. "Why didn't you go after her? She could be lost or worse." Kenny hesitated, guilt coloring his tone. "I didn't want to leave my post with all the schedule concerns and I didn't think—" Robert took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "It's not your fault, Kenny. This isn't the time for blame. We need to find her now." The words lit a fire under Kenny, who nodded quickly. But Robert was already moving, his long strides eating up the distance as he weaved through the backstage corridors. He stopped staff and volunteers at every turn. "Have you seen a little girl? Blue dress, about this tall?" He held his hand at waist height, the memory of Joanne's bright, hopeful smile a sharp contrast to his current dread. She'd be carrying an Iron Man figurine. Each shake of the head was like a stone sinking deeper into his gut. The hotel was sprawling, a labyrinth of rooms, halls, and exits. Joanne could be anywhere. And if she'd gone outside? "Kenny," Robert barked, looking back as the younger man scrambled to keep up. "Find 2 of the bodyguards. We'll need extra eyes if we're searching the crowd." Kenny took off, leaving Robert to press on alone, his footsteps echoing in the long, dim corridors. The doors to the main hall were firmly shut, ruling out any easy way for Joanne to rejoin her group. It didn't make sense. Why would she run? Near an exit, something on the floor stopped him cold. A small, familiar shape glinted under the artificial lights. Bending down, Robert picked up the Iron Man figurine, its metallic paint chipped from being dropped. His grip tightened around it, the toy now a confirmation of his worst fears. She had left the building. Moments later, Kenny reappeared with 2 towering bodyguards at his side. "They're ready, sir. Where do you want to start?" Robert straightened, the figurine still in his hand, his mind racing with possibilities. The city outside was vast and chaotic. The sound of sirens, the unfamiliar streets, anything could have drawn her, frightened her, or worse. "Outside," Robert said firmly, his voice low but resolute. "We searched the perimeter first. She can't have gone far." He paused, his throat tightening as the unspoken hung between them. "We have to find her before someone else does." The brisk night air wrapped around Robert as he stepped out of the hotel, its chill doing little to calm the fire of worry burning inside him. The city pulsed with activity, honking horns, fragments of conversations, and the eerie wail of distant sirens blending into a restless symphony. He paused just long enough to take in his surroundings, his eyes darting from one corner of the bustling street to the next. "Spread out," he ordered the bodyguards, his voice steady but tense. "Stay within sight of each other. Kenny, get back inside and inform the orphanage staff. They need to know what's going on." Kenny nodded and disappeared into the hotel as Robert set off, his steps brisk and purposeful. He scanned behind parked cars, peeked into dim alleyways, and questioned anyone who lingered nearby. Each passing moment felt like a lifetime, the knot in his chest tightening with every unanswered call of Joanne's name. As he rounded the corner to the hotel's grand roundabout, something caught his eye. A flicker of blue amidst the spray of the ornate fountain at its center. He stopped abruptly, his breath catching. There, perched on the fountain's edge, was a small figure. "Joanne!" he shouted over his shoulder to the bodyguards before breaking into a sprint. His eyes stayed locked on her, his relief tempered by the realization that she wasn't moving. Her small frame remained still, her head tilted slightly, her attention fixed across the street. As he closed the distance, Robert slowed, careful not to alarm her. The cascading water of the fountain created a misty veil, softening the sharp edges of the surrounding cityscape. Finally, he reached her. "Joanne," he called gently. The little girl turned at the sound of his voice, her wide eyes meeting his. Relief washed over him, but the expression on her face gave him pause, a complex mix of worry, fear, and curiosity. It wasn't just the situation that had her rattled. Something deeper had taken hold of her thoughts. Following her gaze across the street, Robert saw it. An ambulance parked at the curb, its lights flashing in eerie silence. Nearby, paramedics were gathered around a young boy no older than Joanne. The boy's clothes were soaked, his thin frame shivering as he lay on a stretcher. He whimpered in pain, his cries barely audible over the ambient noise, as the medics worked swiftly to wrap him in a thermal blanket. Robert knelt beside Joanne, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "are you okay?" Joanne's wide eyes flickered between Robert and the departing ambulance, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. I thought," she began, her voice barely above a whisper before it faded into silence. Robert crouched down to her level, his gaze following hers back to the flashing lights. "Were you looking for something, Joanne?" he asked gently. She nodded, her small hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "I was searching for my parents," she admitted in a quiet, trembling voice. "An ambulance like that one. It took them away. And I never saw them again." The raw honesty in her words hit Robert like a punch to the chest. He struggled to steady his breath, his throat tightening at the weight of her loss. "Oh, Joanne," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Joanne's gaze remained fixed on the ambulance. "Are they in there?" she asked, her voice tinged with fragile hope. "Could they be?" Robert's heart ached at the question. He took a slow, measured breath, knowing he needed to tread carefully. "Joanne," he began softly, "this ambulance is here to help the boy who fell into the fountain. The paramedics are making sure he gets the care he needs to feel better." Her shoulders sagged slightly, the glimmer of hope dimming in her eyes. "My parents never came back," she said, her voice small and filled with quiet resignation. "I never saw them well again." Robert's chest tightened further. He wanted to ask more, to understand the full story of her loss, but instinctively, he knew this wasn't the moment to press her. Instead, he placed a steady arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "I'm so sorry, Joanne," he said, his voice a low murmur. "That must have been so hard for you." Joanne leaned into him, her small frame trembling slightly before settling against his side. He felt her begin to relax, her breathing evening out as she clung to the comfort he offered. They sat in silence for a moment, the air around them thick with unspoken emotions. Across the street, the paramedics secured the young boy in the ambulance, the flashing lights casting fleeting shadows over the fountain. When the ambulance doors closed with a heavy thud and the sirens blared to life, Joanne flinched, her body tensing against Robert's. He tightened his arm around her, his presence a silent promise of safety. "I know it's hard," he said gently, his voice cutting through the wail of the sirens. "But you're not alone anymore, Joanne. We'll get through this together, I promise." Her small hand crept up to clutch his sleeve, her grip firm despite her size. Though she didn't say anything, Robert felt the tiniest shift in her posture, a tentative acceptance of his words. "Joanne," he said gently, turning to face her, "would you like to tell me about what happened to your parents? You don't have to if you don't want to, but sometimes talking about it can help." Joanne looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. A need to be understood, perhaps. Slowly she nodded. "Okay," Robert said, giving her an encouraging smile. The mist from the fountain swirled gently around them, softening the sharp edges of the cityscape and creating a cocoon of intimacy amidst the chaos. Joanne sat close to Robert, her small hands resting in her lap as she began her story. Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words cut through the night air like a blade. "It was a normal night," she began, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. "I was in my room, playing with my toys. Then I heard noises from my parents' bedroom downstairs. They argued sometimes, but this was different." Robert remained silent, leaning in slightly, his focus entirely on her. He already felt the ache of what he knew was coming, but willed himself to be present for her. "I went to the top of the stairs," Joanne continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "From there I could see into their room, just a little. There was a man in there. He was wearing a mask, and he had a gun." Robert's breath hitched, his chest tightening at the image she painted. He fought the instinct to speak, to comfort her immediately, and instead let her continue uninterrupted. "There were sounds from the bathroom," she went on, her hands twisting slightly in her lap. "Water running, splashing. Then my parents came out. They were wet, dripping water everywhere." Her voice faltered for a moment before she pressed on. "The man took off his mask. It was my uncle." The revelation struck Robert like a blow. Joanne's voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "They were arguing," she said, "about money, a will. I didn't understand all of it, but there was water all over the floor, and Dad was against the wall. He touched something, and then—" Her voice broke slightly, the first real crack in her composure. There was a bright light. He fell down and didn't move. Robert's eyes closed briefly, the horror of her words sinking in. Her father had been electrocuted. "Mum started screaming," Joanne continued, her voice growing quieter. "She wouldn't stop. Uncle told her to be quiet, but she didn't listen. Then there were loud bangs." Her hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them tighter together. "Mom fell too." She spoke almost mechanically now, as if the story were no longer her own but something she had recited over and over again, turning it into a distant narrative to shield herself from the pain. "Uncle ran away. The neighbors called for help. The ambulances came with their lights flashing, just like the one tonight. They took Mum and Dad away. The police came and took me to the station. They said everything would be okay, but it wasn't." Her voice dipped into a whisper. "Mum and Dad never came back." As her story ended, the night seemed heavier, the bustling city around them fading into the background. Robert stared at the little girl beside him, her small frame impossibly strong for the burden she carried. She didn't cry, though her trembling hands gave away the weight of her emotions. Robert wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Nothing felt adequate in the face of such loss. Instead, he shifted closer, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. "You've been so brave, Joanne," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Braver than anyone should ever have to be. I am so sorry that happened to you. You are incredibly brave for sharing that with me." Joanne leaned into him, her small body seeking the comfort he offered. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the soft trickle of water from the fountain. Joanne looked up at him, her eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. "The police couldn't find my uncle. They said I had to go to Bright Horizon because there was no one else to take care of me. How long have you been there? Robert asked gently. 2 years now, Joanne replied. Robert's mind reeled. This little girl had endured such trauma and loss, yet here she was, participating in a choir, attending galas, and finding the courage to share her story with a virtual stranger. As they sat there by the fountain, the sound of rushing water mixing with the distant city noise, Robert's mind raced with thoughts of how he could help, not just Joanne, but all the children at Bright Horizon who had suffered similar losses. He knew that his presence here tonight, his speech, and even his donation, while important, were just the beginning. The weight of Joanne's story settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a call to action. In that moment, Robert Downey Jr., the actor known for playing a superhero, realized that true heroism lay in the resilience of children like Joanne, and in the actions of those who chose to stand by them in their darkest hours. As Robert held Joanne, offering what comfort he could, the sound of hurried footsteps approached them. Kenny appeared, slightly out of breath, his usually impeccable appearance somewhat disheveled. "Mr. Downey," Kenny said, his voice a mix of relief and urgency, "I've been looking everywhere for you. The children's choir performance is about to begin, and the orphanage staff have been searching for Joanne." Robert nodded, gently pulling away from Joanne to look her in the eyes. "Joanne, your choir performance is coming up soon. Do you feel ready to go back and perform? It's okay if you don't want to." Joanne's face scrunched up in thought for a moment before she nodded. "I can be strong," she said softly, "like Iron Man." A wave of pride washed over Robert. "You're already stronger than Iron Man," he said with a warm smile. He stood up, offering his hand to Joanne. "Shall we?" As they made their way back to the main hall, Robert couldn't help but notice how small Joanne's hand felt in his. He was acutely aware of the responsibility he now felt towards her and the other children at Bright Horizon. At the entrance to the backstage area, they were met by a frantic-looking woman from the orphanage staff. "Joanne, there you are. We've been so worried," she exclaimed, reaching for the girl. Robert knelt down once more to Joanne's level. "You're going to do great out there," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. "And remember, you're the real superhero here tonight." Joanne nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As she was led away to join her group, Robert felt a tug at his heart. He turned to Kenny, who had been watching the exchange silently. "Kenny, make sure I have a clear view of the stage for the performance," Robert instructed. "Of course, sir," Kenny replied, leading him to a prime spot in the audience. As the lights dimmed and the children's choir took their places on stage, Robert's eyes immediately found Joanne. She stood in the second row, her posture straight, her chin held high. The opening notes of "You Raise Me Up" filled the air, and as the children began to sing, Robert felt a lump form in his throat. The lyrics, which he had heard countless times before, now carried a new weight. "When I am down, and oh my soul so weary when troubles come, and my heart burdened be then, I am still and wait here in the silence, until you come and sit a while with me." Robert watched as Joanne sang, her voice blending with those of the other children. He thought about the strength it must have taken for her to stand there, to sing about hope and resilience after everything she had been through. As the song reached its crescendo, Robert found himself blinking back tears. The children's voices soared, filling the room with a palpable sense of hope and determination. "You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be." When the performance ended, the audience erupted into applause. Robert stood, clapping enthusiastically, his eyes never leaving Joanne. As the children filed off stage, he saw her searching the crowd. When their eyes met, he gave her a thumbs up and a wide smile. In that moment, Robert knew that his involvement with Bright Horizon and these children couldn't end with this gala. He had been given a glimpse into their world, into their struggles, and their incredible resilience. As he watched Joanne disappear backstage, he made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would find a way to make a lasting difference in their lives. As the applause for the children's choir faded, the stage was quickly reset for the next part of the evening, the presentation about Bright Horizon Orphanage. Robert settled back into his seat, his mind still processing Joanne's story and the powerful performance he had just witnessed. The lights dimmed once more, and Diane Anderson, the senior staff leader Robert had met earlier, took the stage. Her warm smile belied the seriousness of the topic she was about to address. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diane began, her voice clear and strong, "thank you for being here tonight. What you're about to see and hear may be difficult, but it's the reality faced by the children at Bright Horizon every day." A series of slides began to play on the large screen behind her. The first showed a graph of increasing numbers of orphaned children over the past decade. Robert leaned forward, his attention fully captured. "In the past 10 years, we've seen a 30% increase in the number of children coming into our care," Diane explained. "These children have lost their parents to various circumstances: accidents, illness, crime, and sadly, sometimes abandonment." The next slide showed pictures of Bright Horizon's facilities. Robert's heart sank as he saw the deteriorating conditions: cracked walls, outdated equipment, overcrowded rooms. "Our building was originally designed to house 50 children, Diane continued. "We currently have 78 in our care, with more arriving each month. Our resources are stretched to the breaking point." As Diane spoke about the challenges they faced, insufficient funding, limited staff, growing needs, Robert couldn't help but think of Joanne and the other children he had met. He tried to imagine what their daily lives must be like in such an environment. The presentation moved on to discuss their vision for the future. Diane's voice took on a note of hope as she described their plans for expansion and improvement, if they could secure the necessary funding. "With your help," she said, her eyes scanning the audience, "we can provide these children with not just a roof over their heads, but a true home, a place where they can heal, grow, and prepare for bright futures." As the lights came up, and Diane concluded her presentation to polite applause, Robert remained in his seat, deep in thought. The statistics and images he had seen were sobering, but they also ignited a fire within him. He knew he had the means to make a significant difference, and after meeting Joanne, he felt a personal connection to this cause. Kenny leaned in, speaking softly. "Sir, the orphanage staff are gathering the children to return to Bright Horizon. Did you want to say goodbye to Joanne?" Robert nodded, standing quickly. "Yes, and more than that, Kenny. I want to speak with Diane, and I think we'll be making a detour before heading home tonight." As they made their way through the dispersing crowd, Robert caught sight of the children being organized into groups near the exit. What caught his eye was the distribution of small packages to each child. Robert leaned forward, realizing what was happening. The staff were handing out the newer version of the Iron Man figurines, the ones that had been correctly delivered for this event. He watched as each child's face lit up upon receiving their gift. His eyes searched the group until he found Joanne. She stood quietly, accepting her new Iron Man figurine with a small smile. Robert couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion as he realized she now had both versions, the older one he had given her earlier, and this new one. When she spotted Robert, her face lit up. He approached her, kneeling down once more to her level. "You were amazing up there, Joanne," he said warmly. "A true superhero." Joanne's smile widened. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Downey," she said softly. Robert glanced up at the staff member waiting to escort the children to their bus. "Joanne, I have to talk to some people now, but I promise this isn't goodbye, okay?" Joanne nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and uncertainty. As she was led away, Robert stood, his jaw tightening with resolve. He turned to Kenny, his voice steady but firm. "Find Diane for me, and tell the driver we'll be following that bus to Bright Horizon tonight. I need to see it for myself." Kenny gave a quick nod before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Robert to watch as the children lined up to board the bus. Each face, young and full of unspoken stories, pulled at him. Joanne wasn't the only one with scars that needed healing. There were countless others. Moments later, Diane approached, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Robert, Kenny said you wanted to see me. What's going on?" Robert straightened, his gaze meeting hers with quiet intensity. "Diane, I need to go to the orphanage tonight." Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "To Bright Horizon, are you sure?" "Absolutely," he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "I've met Joanne, but I need to understand more. I want to see where she's been living, meet the people looking after these kids. It's not enough to hear about it from a distance, I need to see it firsthand." Diane studied him for a moment, her lips pressing into a thoughtful line. "It's a long drive, Robert. The kids will be exhausted by the time they get there, and it's not exactly a place set up for visitors at night." "I understand that," he replied, his tone softening. "I won't interfere with their routine. I'll stay out of the way if I have to. But I need to do this. Not just for Joanne, but for all of them." Diane's expression shifted, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," Robert said simply. She nodded, her decision made. "All right, we'll follow the bus." Robert agreed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you, Diane." As she turned to organize the logistics, Robert watched the children file out of the hotel and onto the bus. Each step they took seemed to solidify his resolve. This was no longer about what he could do, it was about what he must do. The weight of the decision settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Robert Downey Jr., the man who had played a superhero on screen, was about to take on a real-life mission, one that would shape not only his life but countless others for years to come. The journey to Bright Horizon Orphanage was a quiet one. Robert sat in his limousine, lost in thought as they followed the bus carrying the children through the city streets. Kenny and the bodyguards maintained a respectful silence, sensing the gravity of the moment. As they pulled up to the orphanage, Robert was struck by how different it looked from the polished images he'd seen in charity brochures. The building was old, its paint peeling in places, with a general air of wear that spoke of limited resources stretched too thin. Diane, who had been expecting their arrival, met them at the entrance. Her professional demeanor couldn't quite mask her surprise at Robert's decision to visit the orphanage so late at night. "Mr. Downey, welcome to Bright Horizon. We're honored to have you here." Robert smiled warmly. "Thank you for accommodating us, Diane." Diane nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, please follow me." As they entered the building, Robert was immediately struck by the contrast to the luxurious hotel they had just left. The hallways were narrow and dimly lit, the floors worn from years of little feet running back and forth. The walls were decorated with children's artwork, a valiant attempt to brighten the space. They followed behind as the staff led the children to their dormitory sections. Robert's eyes scanned every detail, taking in the cracked walls, the aging infrastructure, and the clear signs of overcrowding. As they passed one of the dorm rooms, a small voice called out, "Mr. Downey!" Robert turned to see Joanne standing in the doorway, already changed into her nightclothes, both Iron Man figurines still clutched in her hands. "Hey there, superhero," Robert said, kneeling down to her level. "All ready for bed?" Joanne nodded, then hesitated for a moment before asking in a small voice, "Will you stay, just for a little while? Iron Man makes me feel safe, but—" Her voice trailed off, but Robert understood. His heart ached at the thought of this little girl who had been through so much, seeking comfort in toys and a virtual stranger. He wanted nothing more than to stay, to be the father figure she so clearly needed, but he knew that wasn't possible. "Oh, Joanne," he said softly, "I wish I could. But you know what? You don't need me or Iron Man to be safe. You're the bravest, strongest person I know." Joanne's eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded bravely. Robert reached out and gave her a gentle hug before she was ushered into her room by a staff member. As they continued their tour, Robert's mind was racing. He saw the bland corridors, the sparse recreational areas, the outdated learning facilities. He imagined the children's daily lives here, the struggles, the loneliness, the challenges they faced. But he also saw the potential, the resilience in their eyes, the hope that refused to be extinguished. Turning to Diane, who had been quietly observing his reactions, Robert said, "I'd like to discuss something with you if you have a moment." Diane nodded, leading him to her small office. As they settled into chairs, Robert took a deep breath, his decision crystallizing in his mind. "Diane," he began, his voice filled with determination, "I want to help. Not just with a one-time donation, but in a way that will make a lasting difference for these children." Diane's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "Mr. Downey, that's incredibly generous of you. What did you have in mind?" Robert leaned forward, his eyes alight with purpose. "I want to fund a complete renovation and expansion of Bright Horizon. New facilities, better equipment, additional staff, whatever you need to give these kids the home and the opportunities they deserve." Diane's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Mr. Downey, I don't know what to say. This would change everything for us, for the children." Robert smiled, feeling a sense of rightness settle over him. "There's more," he continued. "I want to set up a special support fund for Joanne, and I'd like the new facilities to be named after her, not me. She represents everything these kids have overcome and everything they can become." As Diane struggled to find words, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his offer, Robert felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that this decision would change not just the lives of the children at Bright Horizon, but his own life as well. He had found a new purpose, a way to use his influence and resources to make a real, lasting difference in the world. They began to discuss the details of his proposal. Robert felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that this decision would change not just the lives of the children at Bright Horizon, but his own life as well. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of discussion and planning. Robert, Diane, and Kenny huddled around the small desk in Diane's office, their excitement palpable as they outlined the future of Bright Horizon Orphanage. "So let's recap," Robert said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We're looking at a complete renovation of the existing building, plus an expansion to accommodate more children comfortably. New dormitories, classrooms, a proper library." Diane nodded, her pen flying across the notepad as she jotted down details. "Yes, and you mentioned a swimming pool. That would be incredible for the children's physical development and recreation." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. "Indoor and outdoor play areas too. And let's not forget the improved learning center. I want these kids to have access to the best educational resources possible." Kenny, who had been quietly taking notes on his tablet, spoke up. "Sir, what about specialized classes? Perhaps we could set up programs for different age groups, art, music, sports, even basic vocational training for the older children." Robert snapped his fingers, pointing at Kenny. "Excellent idea. Diane, what do you think?" Diane's eyes were shining with unshed tears of joy. "It's more than I ever dared to dream of. The impact this will have on our children's lives, it's immeasurable." Robert leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. "There's one more thing I want to add to the list. I think it's crucial we provide mental health services for the children. Many of them, like Joanne, have been through traumatic experiences. They need professional support to heal and grow." Diane nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. We've always wanted to offer more comprehensive psychological support, but the funding just wasn't there." "Well, it is now," Robert said firmly. He turned to Kenny. "Make sure we allocate a significant portion of the donation for ongoing mental health services. I want a full-time child psychologist on staff and resources for additional therapists as needed." As Kenny added this to the growing list, Robert stood up and walked to the window. The night was deep now, the orphanage quiet. He thought of Joanne and the other children sleeping upstairs, unaware of how their lives were about to change. Turning back to Diane, he said, "I have one more request. I want Joanne placed on a special support list funded by me personally. Whatever she needs, education, healthcare, anything, I want to make sure she's taken care of." Diane's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, "Of course, Mr. Downey, your generosity it's beyond words." Robert shook his head. "No, what's beyond words is the strength and resilience of these kids. Which reminds me, I'm serious about naming the new facilities after Joanne. Not the whole orphanage, but perhaps the new wing could be the Joanne Center for Learning and Growth, or something along those lines." As they finalized the details, Robert felt a sense of purpose unlike anything he'd experienced before. This wasn't about playing a hero on screen. This was about making a real, tangible difference in the lives of children who desperately needed it. Finally, as the clock struck midnight, Robert signed the last of the paperwork. He added a personal check above and beyond the renovation costs to provide immediate support for the orphanage's most pressing needs. As they stood to leave, Diane enveloped Robert in a heartfelt hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea what this means for us, for the children." Robert returned the hug, feeling a lump in his own throat. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. It means more to me than you know." As they made their way out of the building, Robert paused in the entrance hall. Through an upstairs window, he spotted a small figure in a nightgown, Joanne staying up late, watching his departure. Robert raised his hand in a farewell wave and saw Joanne's small hand press against the window in response. At that moment, he knew that while he might be leaving the orphanage, he was not leaving these children's lives. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Bright Horizon, but for Robert Downey Jr. as well. As he climbed into his limousine, the weight of the night's events settled over him. He was exhausted, yet energized. As Kenny slid into the seat across from him, Robert let out a long breath. "Well, Kenny," he said with a tired smile, "I think we've got our work cut out for us." Kenny nodded, a rare smile crossing his usually stoic face. "Indeed, sir, but I must say it's work I'm looking forward to." As the limousine pulled away from Bright Horizon Orphanage, Robert leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The image of Joanne at the window stayed with him, a reminder of why he had made this commitment. He knew there would be challenges ahead, bureaucracy to navigate and countless details to manage. But he also knew, with absolute certainty, that it would all be worth it. In the quiet of the car, as the city began to sleep around them, Robert Downey Jr., actor, celebrity, and now philanthropist, allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had come to this charity gala expecting to make a speech and a donation. Instead, he had found a new purpose, a way to use his influence and resources to make a real, lasting difference in the world.